Good evening. This is Wednesday, June 15th. This is the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. We'll do a roll call. Vice Chairman David Abdu, present, and voting member Brian DePena is present. Will you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If I could just beg your indulgence for 1 second, there's a lot of tragedies going on in Orlando. A lot of people are hurting out there. They've been hit really, really hard. So they're a municipality like us. Just want to take a quick moment just to acknowledge the fact that they're going through a lot of pain. So a moment of silence for what they're going through right now. Thank you. Let me just make sure that we're on. Bill? Okay, monitor's not on, Bill. Okay, tonight we have at least 3 documents. So the first document 19616. I believe we sent a letter, the full council sent a letter requesting Mr. Boddy to be here at this meeting. Need to double check on, or his designee. So there's the designee. The first item is dealing with the LaPierre versus City of Lawrence. I think what we're going to do, are you prepared, Raquel, to talk about that?
I am, yes. I'm Charles's designee for the night.
Okay. I'm suspecting this will be a little more complex and more laborious than the other 2 matters.
Okay.
So if it's all right with you, I just think we're going to talk longer about that perhaps. So let me deal with the other 2 issues first, and then we can move on. That
Yep,
work?
sounds fine.
Okay. Document 19716, appropriation transfer. Mr. Ryanello?
Yes, this is the transfer from, we're asking a transfer of $700,000 from the Essex tuition assessment, which is not needed, to a contingency reserve to fund future liabilities, any future liabilities, any unforeseen liabilities.
Let's deal with Essex Aggie, the old Essex Aggie.
He was the old Essex Aggie, and then used to be a separate entity, and we used to get the charge on the cherry sheet, and then they started billing for their students, and then it turns out the school department pays that directly, so it's no longer an assessment. So we had been, obviously it was an assessment every year in our budget, but it no longer was a city a liability, or no longer a city
Hate to be so
expense, if you
crass.
will.
I don't want to say it in a very crass manner. Is this newfound money for us that we don't have to spend out of our budget?
Sort of, in the sense that we had budgeted for it. We were just like we did the previous year, but because of the change in the organization of the Essex Aggie, they ended up billing the school department directly and no longer became a cherry sheet distribution item.
So that's going to the contingency reserve?
So that's our recommendation, is to carry it over and save it for a rainy day, if you will.
And do we have in our packets what the running tally would be in the contingency reserve?
It's 0 now, so it'll have this will be a
That's the
$700,000.
first contribution to
Right.
it. Okay. Any other questions from councilors? Is there a motion to send us up with a favorable recommendation?
So moved.
Motion made.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. The next document's 19816, the authorization of revolving funds. In this case, these are all, there's at least 2 of them. Bellevue Cemetery and the Council on Aging, there's 4. Recreation and Parks and the Lawrence Veterans Memorial Stadium. Mr. Ryanello?
Yes, these are the 4 revolving funds that we have, and annually, since 2012, we're required to reauthorize, the city council is required to reauthorize these revolving funds. So this is an annual vote, and in your packet also is an example, is the appropriation order, or the recommended order, and there's a bunch of verbiage in here regarding the operation of each of these funds, what they could be used for, what the limit of it is, and that it's authorized through June 30 of 2017, if the council so votes.
Is this the same amount, all of these the same amount as last year?
We just put in the requirement is the limit of an expense in that fund. So I usually put a little bit higher than they need so they don't have to come back. But in the document, it indicates the amount that they can expend is limited to the amount in the account.
So again, I'll ask the question, did we authorize the same amounts, the same as last year?
I think they're exactly the same as the prior year, I believe, all of them. I don't think I had to change them at all.
And as a reminder, just because it's the first time some of us are going through this process, these are revolving funds that are off budget, that for the city to be able to, or these organizations to be able to expend it, they need to have authorization to expend these monies. That's why it's before us tonight, just an authorization up to the various amounts, and it's probably worthwhile for me to read what those amounts are. Or should they be part of the motion?
Yes, in accordance with MGL, Chapter 53 and a half, of Chapter 44 of the laws, this is what they're required. We're required annually, City Council is required to annually reauthorize the revolving funds. So the first one in your packet is the Bellevue Cemetery Revolving Fund that has an annual limitation of $85,000. Last year, for example, or this year, for example, they've taken in so far about $56,000, so they haven't exceeded that $85,000 estimate for next year. We don't anticipate. Council on Aging has a limitation of $100,000, and just as an example, they spent approximately, a little over $100,000 so far this year, but it's mostly the previous year's receipts. In the Park and Recreation account, we have, with no required limitation in the Park and Recreation, that's a different Chapter 53D of Section 44. So they're just limited to the amount in the fund, so there's no amount that we need to cite in that fund. But as an example, they take in about $30,000 per year in that fund. Then the Lawrence Veterans Memorial Stadium Revolving Fund, that's the last one that has an annual authorization of $100,000. Last year, they expended about $75,000 to $80,000.
So the revolving fund, just one more time, so they raise money, and up to that amount of money that they've raised, they can spend.
They can spend it on their program. So Council on Aging
program.
raises Council on Aging or charges for some of the bus trips or whatever they take, and then the seniors go on a bus trip. Park and Recreation, something similar, charges for some fees for some leagues, and then spends the money on the lighting for the ball fields and trophies and things of that nature. So, and that's what's outlined in the appropriation order or the revolving fund order, indicating what it would be used for.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion, councilors, to send this up with a favorable recommendation to put a annual expenditure for the Bellevue Cemetery of $85,000, the Council of Aging to $100,000, the Lawrence Memorial Veterans Stadium to $100,000, and there is no restrictions to parks, recreation and parks. Is there a motion for that?
So moved.
Motion made.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Anything else, Mr. Ryanello, before we leave?
No, just,
Are you here for this too?
well, just in case there's a question.
Okay. Let's go back.
Sorry.
Okay. Let's go back to document 19616. This is a transfer of free cash for a 2011 case entitled LaPierre versus the City of Lawrence. To court judgments of $500,000. Mr. Body was invited. Raquel, you're here in his absence, designee. So,
Yeah, the case is actually mine, just for department head purposes. I believe Attorney Body put it down on the city council agenda, but the city, back in 2014, had given an offer of judgment, which is similar to a settlement, but however, it allows a judgment to enter against the city in a case which is called LaPierre versus the City of Lawrence. A little bit of background on that case: the plaintiff, Cordeline LaPierre, alleges that a former Lawrence police officer who was on duty raped her, and she sued not only the officer but also the city. In that lawsuit, that is where the city gave an offer of judgment in 2014 in the amount of $300,000. Just various things went up through the litigation process, and judgment just recently entered, back, I think, at the end of April, that the city had to pay the $300,000, and there is a possibility of up to more or less around $200,000 in interest. Interest in litigation tends to start from the moment that a lawsuit is filed, which is in 2011, and it continues to accrue up until judgment is entered, which was most recently. And so tabulating what that interest would be, the plaintiff's attorney seems to think that it's more or less around $200,000. Hence the request for $500,000, which would be the $300,000 for the judgment, which would go towards damages for the plaintiff. And there's a possibility of up to $200,000 in interest. The reason why I say there's a possibility is because as of right now, the court hasn't ordered any interest on the damages award and hasn't stated what the amount is. But obviously, the plaintiff's attorney has given us, for her point, a best case scenario, and obviously on the city's a worst case scenario, that it would be around $200,000.
So and I know that there may be questions here that if we're out of bounds, you will not be able to answer it, at least here in the public setting.
That's
and
correct.
And there may be a need, and you'll make that determination with respect to the answer, that we might need to go into executive session, although I try to avoid that if we can. I like to make it here as much as public as possible. So,
Sure.
My question then is, why don't we just do a transfer for $300,000? And I totally get why we're going to $500,000. There's a possibility of an additional $200,000, and we're prepared for that. I just don't understand why we would put that money aside right away, and now the court's going to see that we've got $500,000 right away. What's going to stop them from agreeing to that? The city's got money. They put it aside. Go ahead with the interest. Why not? Why do it in that manner?
Well, honestly, it's not only the interest that's an issue. There's another kind of unknown which hasn't been assessed against the city as well. So the lawsuit was filed under the Federal Civil Rights Act, which if a party wins under the Federal Civil Rights Act, they are entitled to attorney's fees. So there is this component as well that she is at this point claiming $450,000 in attorney's fees. That amount hasn't been litigated at all, but we know at the very minimum that between interest and attorney's fees, there is going to be a judgment in the realm of $500,000, not including, then that would be including the $300,000 for the judgment, and then whether or not it is interest or attorney's fees, potentially $200,000 or potentially more. But we were trying to cap the exposure at this point by limiting to interest, even though we know that there's this other aspect of the potential judgment that hasn't come down or hasn't been litigated in the courts.
Right. And I'm not sure of anything. I would think that when you're before the court and explaining to the court how challenging our fiscal situation is, and that putting between $400,000 and $700,000 in addition to the $300,000 that we've gone to for a settlement puts a city like Lawrence, who is rubbing two nickels to make things happen. If you go around the city, $700,000, $200,000 could go a long way toward a lot of different things, whether it's safety, sidewalk issues that a lot of our residents have problems with, trees that are buttressing in, unsafe conditions there, road repair. I mean, there's a million things that are out there, heating systems that can fall at a moment's notice, HVAC systems, whatever. There's a lot of things. And it just, I think it perhaps hurts our argument if we start putting aside more money than what we're required to, because that just says that I could use that as saying, something, we can afford that. And I'm of the position of saying, That's a hardship for the city when we have such great needs, and I don't want to color the case at all. It's a very serious allegation. It's a very serious case. I don't know the details behind it. I can't speak to it, nor do I want to. But clearly the city is making the argument in the way that you are, and clearly it's settled, so we've come to a resolution, an agreement. But I hope I'm making some sense, where I just don't want to throw out all this money out at first. And then they're saying, well, you've got the money, you threw it out there, and let's at least go for it. I think that we should probably say, we don't have the money. I'm going to have to go before the council again to try to get some more money on this thing, because all we've got is the money for the settlement.
Well, I think that consideration was talked about. The only issue is that she's seeking interest at a rate of 8%. So there is this, I know I've been working a lot with Mark Iannello to try and make sure that once the judgment came down, we got a check issued ASAP with respect to the amount that we knew. So if anything should come down, it could come down any day now regarding any kind of interest or attorney's fees. I mean, that is continuing to accrue interest as we speak. I think $200,000 above the judgment takes into consideration the fact that it could be interest only in the amount of $200,000, and there could be an amount above and beyond that with respect to attorney's fees. And it also takes into account that there will be some interest, whether it's $200,000, and the attorney's fees, whether it's $450,000 or somewhere or something south of that, that $200,000 at this point adequately reserves that for the city, and it doesn't expose the city to further, money damages in the sense of the interest that I spoke of earlier. So I think that was the conversation that we were trying to have, because we realized that, with interest accruing on such high numbers, the interest alone can sometimes balloon and make what's actually due more than what it should have been had we already had the money and funds ready to go.
Well, Councilor Ruano, I rely heavily on you and your expertise, and you're in the thick of this, so I lean to your judgment and recommendation on the best way to approach it, having you clearly have considered the prospects that I have presented. I don't have any further questions. I'm not sure if any councilors do. Mr. Abdu.
Is LaPierre versus City of Lawrence related to, and please, I'm fairly new, as is my colleague, Councilor DePena. Is this related to the Sledge case versus the police department?
Officer Sledge is the officer that's involved in this. I don't know what his lawsuit is with respect to the city.
No, not his lawsuit, but
Oh, okay.
the suit against the city. So those two are connected.
Got you, yes. So she sued 3 different people. One of them is Officer Sledge, the other one is the city, and the third one is former police chief John Romero. But it is all the same
Thank
case.
you. That helps because of the notoriety in the newspapers. It
Right.
helps me back in more details from what I've read in the newspaper, so
Yes, so it is the same case.
no further questions. Thank you.
All right. If there are no other questions for Councilor Ruano, is there a motion to send this up with a favorable recommendation? Or a recommendation? You get to make the call.
So, right now, we're voting on the 500,000, which would, the question before us, that would be 300 for the settlement, the 200 put aside for anticipated costs, and then anything further would see you again, Mr. Iannello, or the city attorney's office.
Right, I mean, that's the other issue, is that, we're still litigating a lot of these issues. And quite honestly, the final number is unknown, but because she's entitled to attorney's fees under the civil rights statute, and she's already claimed $450,000 at the very minimum. I mean, it's going to be in that range if you couple her attorney's fees with interest that may already accrued, if the court orders it. So that's where we kind of based that number on. But to be honest, it is an unknown number. We could be back here asking for more money. There's a possibility we don't use it all. But looking at what she submitted for her fees, looking at the case law, I think it's safe to say that apart from the $300,000 judgment, the city more than likely will be paying out at least $200,000 in some combination of other costs.
Through you, Mr. Chair, are these attorney fees related to the lawsuit against the city or all lawsuits related to the matter?
Right now, the fees that she submitted is for litigating the entire matter. Sledge, because of the criminal case that he had stemming from this incident, he's been incarcerated for the entire time. So he didn't really litigate his portion of the case. He was defaulted early on. So even though the fees are in theory against every defendant, it was really the case against the city that she was proceeding on. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, and I think the questions I want to ask, I can't ask in open session because it's future possible strategy or actions by the city, so.
You can certainly ask it, and she can certainly defer if you want to, Mr. Abdu.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, so I will. So, you know, I feel for anyone that's in this predicament. That being said, our position is stewards of the city's money, not here to judge. That's the courts. I would like to, so my question to you is, I won't belabor this anymore. Do we have the ability to recover these costs through, like you just said, Officer Sledge has been in jail, but I mean, the city is going to get a large tab here. Do we have the ability to recover these costs in any way from Officer Sledge or the lack of being an attorney, his estate?
No. It's the judgment that entered against the city is against the city only. There is no finding of liability against Sledge. There is no mechanism legally by which we could recover from Sledge, given that the judgment is against the city only. And just practically speaking, he was given an 8 to 10 year sentence. He's still presently incarcerated. I mean, trying to get any amount of money, nevertheless, $500,000 is probably practically impossible. But even legally, like I said, the judgment is against the city only. Given that that's the posit of the case, the answer would be no. We wouldn't be able to recover any.
I will rest after this comment. So the reason for my question was because if we're paying for her litigation against Sledge and against Romero and against the city, you know, specific to Sledge, it just seems, I would have been hopeful, or I was hopeful that possibly there was some ability to recover something, but I totally understand we're a young officer and he's incarcerated. There's not much there. So, no further questions, just frustrated by the predicament.
Understood.
Not by the attorney, but by the circumstance.
Understood. The chair is still looking for a motion.
Motion to recommend favorably to the full council.
Motion's been made
Second.
and seconded. Any further discussion? Just going to make one real quick editorial comment on this. I probably will not make it at full council level. We have a lot of very good police officers in the police department, and when there are bad apples, it really does cost us an awful lot of money, and it's very painful when the public trust is somehow compromised. And then what it does, it has a domino effect. It erodes trust and confidence for the people, and it also, in this particular case, takes money out of the pockets of the city that could be using that money for public safety, public service, a lot of real other needs that we have. We have lots of needs. And so it really is tremendously damaging when we get to this position where we have to settle and then go into this kind of situation. So I just didn't want this opportunity to pass without making that very quick statement.
Of course.
If there's no other comments or questions, I will call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Okay. Mr. Iannello, one quick question. On any of these matters that we voted for this evening, are there any public hearings required?
On this matter that you just voted on, the public hearing was already ordered at the full council meeting last week.
Yep.
So the public hearing will be held on June 21st.
The other two matters do not
Yeah, the
require
two
public
matters do
hearings?
not require a public hearing.
Are there any other matters on the council agenda? I'd like to take document 17316 off the table matters really quickly.
Second?
Motion been made and seconded, I hope. And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. I have not focused on that at all. This is the examination of excise tax collection in the RMV. It's on my to-do list, and I assure my colleagues here that I will get to that, and I apologize that has not happened yet. Is there a motion to table?
Motion to table.
Motion made, seconded.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Ayes have it. And real quickly on document, take document 11016 off the table, please.
So moved.
Motion made,
Second.
and second, all in favor, say aye.
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 Ayes have it. I have been working, this is the payment in lieu of tax program. I have been working with the city assessor's office. I do have a very rough skeleton that very soon will be presented to this body. I have talked to the mayor as well, and so movement has been made on this. I'm not prepared tonight to release that information quite yet, but I just wanted to give you an update that we are looking at a volunteer program that it looks to put a floor as to the amount of money that is assessed values of properties, and asking that non-profits or organizations who do not pay taxes contribute to help our city. So that's the update. Is there a motion to table 11016?
So moved.
Motion made.
Second.
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. If there's nothing else, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion made.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Ayes have it.
See you on the meeting.